We're almost there. We're almost there to a weekend, but until then, we have another episode here of Mic'd Up on Pittsburgh Sports Live, Pittsburgh Sports Now, and all throughout the Now family of networks. WV Sports Now, of course, because that has been a site that has a lot of activity right now for good reason, which means a lot of show content. And thank you to all who have been listening and engaging in all the shows I put up there. Anything with Big 12 has gone wild, and for good reason right now, because of course that drama has continued. I'm Mike Asti, that's Mike Vukovcan. Mic'd Up is presented by Martin Lawn Services. Contact Doug Martin for all your lawn care needs at 412-849-5894. Also, we had a day of free agency. We had some moves in the National Hockey League. The Penguins, not as involved as some would like, and certainly that still piece that people think needs change dangling out there, but maybe a familiar face will return. That seems where most fans are talking right now, but other moves need made if that one does not get made. To start things off, though, the Big 12 conversation is just never going to die. And as we're talking off air here, we actually don't know when this is all going to officially occur because Texas and Oklahoma, they're out of the media deal, but that's not until 2025. So that is I guess, the latest they would be out of the conference. They could get out a couple of years earlier, but this doesn't certainly appear that it's happening next year or maybe even the year after that. But it is officially happening. It certainly looks like it's happening. The Big 12 still trying to hang on. The AAC now, which has been a football conference that's not Power 5, but they're kind of now thinking that if they can absorb the Big 12, they would become Power 5. Maybe that would take the automatic bid, because there's also been a conversation that, hey, if a school like West Virginia somehow gets stuck in the Big 12 to stay, but if the Big 12 has the automatic bid, which currently would be the situation for the expanded playoff and current playoff, then they would just get in the playoff every year as a 4 seed or whatever seed it would be by winning a really weak conference. And it almost would all of a sudden be a positive thing, even though it's unfair to other clubs. Would they keep that automatic bid, though? Would it go the AAC? Would the Big 12 dissolve altogether? That's what the AAC wants. And the Big 12, while they're trying to stay together, is now picking a fight with ESPN, because ESPN, of course, heavily involved in college football, and telling ESPN, stop talking to schools, stop talking to institutions that could possibly be a negative to the Big 12, which also screams to me that maybe there are some schools. Rumors have been Kansas and even West Virginia. West Virginia wouldn't even makes more sense to be involved in this because of the ACC situation, trying to get out, maybe talking to ESPN and the Big 12, wanting to prevent that from occurring. So, Mike, we're in another week of this. Every day, this just picks up steam and gains more traction. What are your thoughts right now? And do you think the AAC in particular will be able to, I guess, honestly, it makes sense. I would probably do the same thing if I'm running the AAC, but does that make sense for them to just absorb the Big 12? Can the Big 12 stay alive? Because they're trying to stay alive, but it's looking rather difficult.
Well, there's so much going on here. No, the first thing I'm thinking before I get into your question here, I was just thinking this.
Sure.
With all this chaos going on right now,
yeah.
What I think this is going to happen, unfortunately, until all this stuff is settled, I don't think we're going to see the 12-team playoff until you find out what until you find out what conferences, because they're not going to be handing out an automatic bid to a conference that
with 8 teams without any elite teams, but right now legally they would have to, so that's probably why they're going to want to delay things.
Well, exactly. Yeah. I don't see that happening. I don't see the playoffs happening 2022 like some had hoped, unless things escalate.
But Texas and Oklahoma ruining college football.
Yeah, exactly.
Really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think the AAC is thing's gonna work. I think the only way what's going to end up happening here is either the Big 12 is going to somehow. The Big 12 isn't going to go away, in my opinion. It's just too established of a conference with tradition to just all of a sudden float off into nowhere.
They have Fox until 2025 too.
Yeah, there's just what's going to happen is their commissioner Bowlesby is going to have to go pick some schools, and they're going to have to live with that. He's going to have to go conference hunting and try to find the biggest names that he can that make sense, that makes that conference is
that's
big.
what you have to do. That's what happened last conference realignment, that somebody tried to move, so somebody else plucked somebody else, and then it caused a frenzy.
He's just going to have to find the biggest name, the biggest brand, the biggest market that he can that makes sense for the Big 12. Actually, regardless if it makes sense or not, because none of this makes sense.
No.
Probably somebody from the West Coast. I know that. Okay. I know everyone's thinking Big 12. You got to stay down there. I think they got to forget about that and just go to the biggest schools possible, and probably move out to the West Coast and find some schools out there that are vulnerable. But I thought that story with ESPN, the commissioner coming out and just calling out a media member that you have $1 billion deal with. Right. To me, that was just fascinating, and he laid his cards on the table and says, "I have proof." So you do that, you're basically calling out ESPN. And from ESPN's sense, it makes sense for them too, because what do they want to pay the Big 12 conference $1 billion for if they don't have the two main tenants? That's not good.
Oh, benefit. Sure. And you look at the numbers in terms of TV market and TV watchers and eyeballs and all of that. We can argue all day on what West Virginia and other schools would bring to a conference. I do think West Virginia would bring eyeballs to, say, the ACC. I've talked about that on my show. But overall, in terms of eyeballs from the Big 12 the last few years, it's been Texas, Oklahoma, and then a big gap between anybody else. And several schools combined haven't even got to that level. I thought about that actually, too, that you do need to be a little bit proactive here. It's kind of a wild world we're living in the sports world, because we're not going to discuss this, but also yesterday, two major things happened, Mike, that I never thought we would see in sports ever.
I know the one of them that you're going to say.
Well, because the ones you mentioned, you had a commissioner of a major conference that basically just slapped a major media outlet right in the face during a media deal. And then you had a Hall of Fame quarterback sitting there wearing the gear of a franchise, including a historic franchise, with the backdrop of that franchise behind him in the Packers, sitting there saying, the GM, the coach, all these people have done me wrong. I didn't even want the coach a couple years ago. He's cool now, but I didn't like him. We got to make some moves. They're not talking to me. I was going to retire. You're lucky I'm sitting here. Wild. We've seen some diva athletes. That was wild stuff. So those are the two. Maybe there's another one, but it's just a wild world that we're in right now.
The other one I had is the kid from Texas might become the first high school football player to opt out of his senior season. He's a commit to Ohio State, and he's going to opt out of playing his senior season and go to the Ohio State early so that he can collect $1 million contract on the new NLI agreement. I don't know where any of this is happening.
We'll get to this too in a second. We got a Marc-Andre Fleury finding out being traded on Twitter. This is just what a 24-hour period. And I guess we talked about that before, but the inevitable was going to occur with that, and it makes sense in some ways, and I'm happy.
Hey, Mike, I had a question for you. The Big 12 commissioner, in the letter, or one of the reports I saw, I forget who, he's urging the remaining members to stand strong, and that they need to be solidify, solidarity in order to until they figure out what's going on, and to not break apart, so that they basically collect their money for the next year. Do you think is that possible?
I don't think that's going to occur. It makes tons of sense for the Big 12, because I think what the Big 12 and Bowlesby knows in their heart of hearts, even if they have this TV deal and right now have the playoff automatic bid, a lot of that can change. Things can always change. If West Virginia would be successful, if Kansas would be successful, even though that's not a great football program, but it is for basketball, there's still money there. If they would lose anyone else, really, of any level of prestige, that would probably be it. First off, you can't have an odd number, but then it would just look really ridiculous if anybody else would go. So I do think part of their conversation with ESPN, that was a shot across the bow to basically say ESPN is in a way, and it's helping ESPN. They're trying to help themselves, but helping to kill our conference if they get certain schools into another conference because they think our media deal's not as good, and say they helped to get West Virginia with Shane Lyons, who has connections to ESPN and the ACC. If that occurs and you get West Virginia and the ACC for that media deal, they're going to kill us, and that is not that's bad pool based on our current media deal. So they're trying to. This is all about the Big 12 trying to stay alive, and that's the interesting part here, because if you recall 10 years ago when this occurred for the Big East basically said, okay, you win, we'll become a basketball conference. These schools got to split up. We're going to take our L. We were able to stay around as long as we were. The Big 12 saying, I'm going down swinging, and you're going to have to bury me. And if we have a 6-team conference with the automatic playoff spot, you watch us have a 5-loss West Virginia team in that damn thing. And if you have a problem with it, it's because of this. They are not against doing that. So that I wouldn't be surprised if the next move, and what it should be for the Big 12, is to pluck schools. And I had somebody actually bring this up to me on Twitter. The SEC, yes, there's money there. And you mentioned the West Coast, and I could see that with Arizona, maybe Arizona State, etc. But if you have schools in the SEC now that are in a conference that is so deep, so good, so ridiculous, that could really split into 2 conferences, if that doesn't occur, I would maybe call even Tennessee and say, look, you're an incredible brand. You would have a new media market. The geography wouldn't be that far for you based on where you're located. And you're good, but you haven't been great in a while. If you're in the SEC, you're buried. Now you're 7th or 8th down this pecking order. You come here, you could win this conference, or you at least contend for it. I would maybe try to pluck some of those schools. I would maybe try to pluck a middle of the road, maybe SEC program like a Tennessee. It wouldn't be as great as having Oklahoma or Texas by any means. It still might not be a major field because Tennessee hasn't been good for a while. But that would be what I would do. But
what about Texas A&M?
Texas A&M could be another one because they were in the Big 12 before, and they also may be very, very upset right now because this basically has happened with the SEC against what they wanted. They clearly did not want Texas and Oklahoma in there. Now they may stay because it would look like they're fleeing and they're not as good as those programs since they would go to the conference those schools left. But yeah, I would call Texas. That would be a great ad. Texas A&M would be a better ad than Tennessee. One of those 2. Nebraska. That would be another historic situation. They were in there before. I would maybe even, you go call the Big 10 and try to call Maryland or something, or certain schools that just are basically dead in the water in their conference.
Yeah.
Even though they're in there with a media deal and they have some stability. I don't know. But
what it's going to take is this commissioner is going to need to think out of the box. He's going to have. He knows he's in his conference is in survival. And
his mode. Job too.
It's in survival mode, and he needs to do. He can't think traditionally here. He can't be thinking geographically. He needs to go all around and find a school, as you mentioned, that might want to improve their profile and all of a sudden become, the one of the main brands instead of an afterthought.
Yeah, I would honestly not even worry about ego. I'd be calling everyone. It's like you're doing a cold call. I'm just calling the list down. I don't care who you are, where you are. You are national title. I don't care if it's Alabama. I'm making a phone call. What is it going to hurt? There's no negative. Okay, no, all right. We're just the same situation we are now.
All right, who's next?
Just keep going down. There's nothing that could be a problem that would be worse for you. You couldn't be in a worse situation than you currently are now. So this has moved really fast. It's always going to have legs to it, really, until it eventually is finalized. That's a great point you brought up at the top of the show about this clearly going to delay the expansion talk. This clearly would make the expansion have to change things. Maybe the Big 12 would honestly, based on what's going on right now, if the expansion, college football would delay the expansion and then try to take the automatic big away from the Big 12 after announcing the major conferences would have that. I wouldn't be shocked if the Big 12 and Bowlesby try to go to court over this, because clearly they're trying to swing, and they're clearly going to try to not go down. But I think eventually the Big 12 will be dead. But it will be interesting where these teams go and what
Big 12 actually, when you think about it, Mike, the Big 12 is going to have some leverage here
Maybe.
with the rest of college football, because the whole college football and these presidents with the money, they want this expansion. And until the Big 12 situation is settled, that ain't happening. So they're not going to get there. So the Big 12, in a way, kind of holds some power and holds some cards.
Yeah, almost the way they've handled this, even though because you were going to lose Texas and Oklahoma, even the letters to Texas and Oklahoma, if you've read those, they really are getting bold and brash, where they basically told Oklahoma and Texas when they were kind of just dance around, if this decision's been made, tell us, we don't even need to talk to you any longer. Like, they are not playing around. Yeah. So that is true. They do have some leverage because of the expansion. And then they also have leverage on this end. We've mentioned several schools. There are several other schools that are they're in stability of a conference, but they're not in a great situation. And you add more schools, they're just further down the pecking order. Some maybe even feel a little bit slighted by this occurring, like we mentioned with Texas A&M. If you're any of those other conferences right now, which is what happened last time there was conference realignment, you might be a little nervous right now, and that provides some Big 12 leverage, whereas Big 12 might call the Big 10 or the ACC and say, look, if you're not going to play ball with us and help us stay around, we will call every school you have and try to pluck somebody, and it's just playing the percentages. That's 20-plus schools. If they pluck one or two, yeah, they swung and missed at all the rest, but then they plucked one or two, and that causes tremendous expansion. That causes a riffle all over the place. It's not just a Big 12 problem. Now it's everybody's problem. And the only leverage they have, the only part of why the ACC maybe would not want that to occur, if the ACC wants to get another TV deal, they need another team. That's the only leverage that, say, West Virginia would have right now, or say the Big 12 would even have if the ACC doesn't want them to pluck somebody. So it's different manipulation schemes going on, different leverage going on, but this is a story that's going to keep going on right now, and who knows? It's very, very interesting. Makes it interesting for us, and the fact that the Big 12 just does not want to die at all. We're going to transition now, though, as we wrap up the show. The Penguins have a day, not a day that many would want, not a splash day. There's still moves that need to be made. They lose, of course, Tanev, etc., from the expansion draft, some minor moves, but nothing too of note. And this also goes in conjunction with Marc-Andre Fleury being traded from Vegas to Chicago, but Fleury making it clear he does not want to play with the Blackhawks. In fact, doesn't really want to play anywhere else besides Vegas or maybe Pittsburgh. Thoughts even that he would retire. A lot of local media are teasing some stories. We've yet to find out what's going on with that. There's talk maybe the Penguins are going to try to snag him. It certainly would depend on the package. It certainly would be at least a temporary, you'd figure, improvement from Jari. He just won the Vezina. But this is a weird situation for the Vezina winner to be bounced by his team. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, finds out from Twitter. So I'm sure that doesn't help things. But will the Penguins get Fleury back? And then do they need to make these other moves that have yet to be made? Because right now this team is very similar to last year, which, of course, disappointed right in that first round.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't want to be doom and gloom here, but I think with this, with the Penguins salary cap situation,
right,
lack of assets as far as draft picks and everything else, I don't think Ron Hextall, this is going to be a very unusual year for the Penguins. Normally under Jim Rutherford and even prior to, the Penguins have always been an exciting team as far as trades, free agency. Yeah. It was something that, they were able to point out as
they're in win now mode. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, they win, they went out and did something in the off season to make themselves better. Unfortunately, because of the current situation, I don't believe Hextall is able to. And I think we could be coming to the beginning. I don't want to, like I said, I think this is the start, the decline of the Penguins. With Malkin, Crosby, they're not getting younger. They really have nobody that you're going to be able to trade for players that you're going to be able to keep this train moving. And I don't see anything major happening with the Penguins this offseason. From all the reports are that there were a couple. I think Dan on Hockey Now reported that Hextall said he was inclined to stay with Jari and DeSmith for next season. If that's the case, Penguin fans are going to be they're not going to be happy with that. And if you
Right.
go into next season basically with this same roster and just pick up some of the third line guys that they did yesterday or fourth line guys,
Right.
you're not a better team.
No, and really, they're not a better team if you go in with the Smith and Jari, just for the fact that I think everyone can agree. It's one of the few things that everybody has agreed in Pittsburgh sports media in recent years is that if they had better goaltending, they probably would have still won that series against the Islanders. And Jari certainly was a problem. Maybe he'll improve because that was his first go round in the postseason. He is still very, very young. Certainly, DeSmith is young. It could happen. And as some have also said, it was good enough to win a division, which they hadn't done in years. It just, you got to go further in the postseason. The window is certainly shrinking. They're not really built as a postseason team in those minor moves. They're just really switching out Tanev for another, switching out one for another. They lose some, they gain some. Nothing has been major. And you also got to have some Penguin fans be upset by the fact that other teams out there are making more proactive moves. So Hextall and Burke seem like a great fit right now for the Penguins, especially if Rutherford had to be gone. But you look at the Detroit Red Wings, they go snag a young stud goaltender in his early 20s from Carolina for just a few draft picks and some moves. Carolina fans are freaking out on why they would make that move. But that also sends you a message that, hey, if that could occur, then did the Penguins miss the boat there? Should they have been on the phone with Carolina? Should they have been involved in some moves there? Should they have tried to go get him? Detroit didn't have tons in terms of assets either. Yes, maybe some more draft picks. But when you have teams making moves for goaltenders, there's nothing left for you. The only move that is there, and this is the elephant in the room always, especially after he was traded from Vegas to Chicago, is to try to get Fleury and have it be a temporary bridge. He's not going to be there forever. He's certainly not young. It wouldn't be your guy of the future now. But if you bring him in, he's still young enough. He could be there for 1 or 2 years, and that would at least improve your chances during the Crosby-Malkin window until it fully slams shut. I don't think it's going to happen, but that would at least be a higher possibility because they probably would have to give up less, especially now with clear reports that he's not willing to play for Chicago. So Chicago has a goaltender that just would be dormant. So maybe they'd want something for nothing. Do you see the Fleury situation occurring? Because that's the only temporary bridge to fix goaltending if they can't go get somebody else for the future, since, as I mentioned, Detroit already stole the guy maybe they should have went to go after.
No, I don't see Fleury happening. Guy that I would go after, because this team's in a rebuild,
right?
And they're shipping off people, and they're going to be years away from contending, is John Gibson.
Yeah,
from out in Anaheim.
Yeah,
I don't think he's obviously younger than Fleury. He's a guy that has done it before. I think right now he's surrounded by a really bad team, and it has nothing to do with the local angle either.
I was going to say that Penguin fans would love that. He doesn't.
Yeah, I'm not into the local.
He's from Pittsburgh.
I'm saying it because I think he's a guy that's available, and he's a guy that I just think he's in a bad situation right now, and I don't know what his price would be. I don't know if Anaheim might want to just get rid of him to get rid of the money. We've been having a lot of those deals in the NHL this offseason. And if that's the case, and if you can acquire a number one goalie like him, who's a real number one goalie, I would do that in a second.
Yeah, that would certainly improve the team, to say the least. Of course, Baldwin High School alum. So that would be something that Pittsburgh fans would just freak out and absolutely love. If you can't make Fleury happen, that would probably be the other thing that would make Pittsburgh fans the happiest. And his age would certainly make that great. And of course, you still need to make sure that he's good with you, because that has been an issue where goaltenders his age have had great year or two and then have faltered, certainly going back to Murray with those cup years and then what happened afterwards, and now his career has kind of floundered. That might be too pie in the sky for a type of move there, but maybe Anaheim or whatever, maybe they're willing to make a move because they have a young goaltender who they were going to build around, but there's nothing to build around right now. So maybe you would rather have draft picks. Again, who knows? Obviously, like a Carey Price, that price tag is just going to be way too high, even though he was dangled out there as conversation in the expansion draft. There was thoughts that Montreal wouldn't protect him. Just we're in the cup final, but obviously the price tag would be too high to try to bring in now. So I don't know if there's a move to be made. Honestly, we might have discussed the only moves that could be made in terms of goaltending. And no matter what move you make all around, this is not the offseason where it would even matter if they would bring in a Hossa-like deal or a Phil Kessel-like move. That wouldn't matter right now. They need to improve the goaltending. They need to improve the defense. And I don't know if those moves are out there, unfortunately. That is one, but otherwise, I don't know if those moves are out there. So this also will be another story that's going to keep continuing on this offseason. But Penguin fans haven't been impressed, and there's not been reason to be impressed to this point by the Penguins offseason. We've seen them have a slow day or so and then splash. That was, of course, under Jim Rutherford. Some didn't like it because it has a little bit handicapped the future right now, losing all those draft picks, but they were in win now mode, and it certainly made it exciting then. It's a tougher job now for Hextall and Burke, though, because when you have a guy, your predecessor was in such win now mode, trading draft picks left and right, even though it did lead to 2 cups, and he was successful in that regard. It makes it tougher on you. So it could be that we're close. We're certainly closer to the end than we are the beginning or the middle by any means. This is still a team that is good enough to make the playoffs for sure after winning a division title. But in terms of being built for a deep playoff run, not the case right now. And fixing the goaltending is the one piece that could really change things, but I don't know if that move exists out there. Make sure you stick with us here throughout the Now family of networks. Of course, Pittsburgh Sports Now. Subscribe to this channel here on PSL. More Steelers training camp coverage here. More video content coming here on this channel. And, of course, on Steelers Now, Pittsburgh Sports Now, WV Sports Now. That Big 12 news just won't ever stop. Big 12 conversation won't ever sleep. And then Pittsburgh Hockey Now, of course, for any moves the Penguins do make, or even conversation about moves they do not, and rumors and what other teams do, because it could connect to the Penguins, to say the very least. That'll do it for this edition of the show. Mic'd Up is presented by Martin Lawn Services at 412-849-5894 for Mike and I.